everyone, and welcome to IoT Asia 2017. What we're going to talk about today is IoT's tipping point. And we all know the concept of tipping point. It's where a number of things come together, and then we initiate this action afterwards. So small things create a big impact. So we're going to get to that. But the first thing I want to do is talk about the state of IoT in Asia today. Now, we've all heard the hype. There's going to be 30 billion connected things in 2020. Or if you listen to Cisco, it's going to be 500 billion connected things by 2025. McKinsey says it's going to be up to about 11 trillion in value by 2025. But these are big numbers, and I'm not that concerned with the numbers. What I'm concerned about is how are we going to get there? So what do we have to do to actually change that? But to assess where we are today, I thought we'd look at a smart city. And the smart city I've chosen is Taipei, because Taipei is on a similar track to what we see in Singapore. It's moving on from the basic stuff around predictive maintenance, where we've connected up and we can actually monitor the equipment to make sure it works. They've done asset tracking for their different devices and equipment. They started using video surveillance, and then they moved into smart buildings so they can drive energy efficiency. Then they started doing vehicle tracking so they know where the buses are. And then they did a really interesting smart street lamp initiative last year. It helps you control the energy costs, do better security for the lighting, but it's also those base stations then in the street lamps where they're sticking their environmental sensors. And now what they've started moving to is into shared transport. And on the transport side, they started out a while ago doing shared bikes. Now they're going to be launching a shared scooter scheme and a shared car scheme. Now, why am I talking about all these things? Because I want to explain to you, this is sort of the evolutionary path. We've heard about smart cities for years. We've heard all this hype about how great it's going to be as it's changing our lives. But a lot of these things as citizens we're not going to see. And the challenge is, the real value in smart cities in the early days is much more infrastructure-centric. And then it moves towards citizen-centric. And we have to be honest, we're barely scratching the surface right now of the citizen-centric side. So there's still a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of exciting things to come up. But what we need to ask ourselves are some tough questions. We're making progress, but are we really making enough progress right now? And I'm pretty sure that everyone would agree that, well, no, we probably expected a little bit more by now. Question 2, are we learning from our mistakes? We've gone out there, a lot of projects haven't succeeded. We've seen a lot of new devices come out that have failed relatively quickly. Certain things haven't lived up to their expectation. So why aren't we learning from that and applying it? And most importantly, we need to ask ourselves, what can I or what can we as an industry do to drive IoT success? And on that, this is what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes, because I think it all comes down to collaboration. And if you don't know this image, this is the Singapore women's expedition team that climbed Everest back in 2004. And the reason I talk about this with collaboration is I read an article about them recently. And it wasn't the physical training that they did. It was how they set up their structure internally, how they created teamwork. They agreed on shared goals. They defined roles and responsibilities and created a culture where you could question anybody on the team if you thought something was incorrect. And that type of teamwork is really collaboration. And that's what we need to see more of in the events going forward. So the first part of this, and there's going to be 3, is about internal collaboration. And it's not about just getting people to sit around the table. It's about engaging them and making sure they participate. Because IoT is more than technology. What we tend to think is, well, it's got a gadget, so I'll give it to IT and let them sort it out. And it's not that simple. Yeah, you need technology involved, but you need to have senior management buy-in to really push these initiatives forward and help create that culture. You need strategy to get involved because they're the ones who are going to define your future business plans. Operations, because it applies against the business processes. Marketing, because it's going to change your customer experience. Finance, because, let's face it, someone's got to pay the bills for this. And most importantly, the users. Now, when I look at IoT initiatives that have done very well, they've pulled together these stakeholders. When I look at the ones that have failed rather quickly, they tend to just leave it within IT. So we need to collaborate more. But that's just inside of a business. Now, what if you're actually a smart city or a smart nation like Singapore? Well, the way it's operated in Singapore, under the Smart Nation, we've had 3 main areas working on it. Under the Prime Minister's office, you have the Smart Nation Program Office, or the SNPO. Underneath the Ministry of Communications and Infrastructure, you have GovTech, which does a lot of the delivery. And then you've got another Ministry of Finance, which looks at things like the Digital Government Directive. So that's things about how do you drive security and 2-factor authentication back to the users. So yes, these groups do work together and they collaborate, but they're coming up with initiatives still independently. Now, what's interesting is last week, they've changed that. And effective May, what you're going to have is this new group set up, which is a Smart Nation and Digital Government group with a Digital Government office below it. And what I like about this is they're going to have representatives from those main players sitting in that office, starting to define the initiatives for the government. And this is good because this is collaboration internally across different government organizations. And then what you have is GovTech who can work with the group and help deliver those. This is important because what we're going to be able to do now is drive more efficiency, leverage common platforms, and start sharing data. So this is one of the better initiatives I've definitely seen around smart cities, and I can't wait to see how it gets implemented in the coming months. So how do you drive internal collaboration? Number one, identify diverse stakeholders. You don't have to be a techie to be involved in IoT. I'm not really a techie, and I love IoT. Lead by example, and this is senior management. We need people to start pushing this stuff and realizing that leveraging technology can protect you against these digital disruptors that come in, or it can streamline your business processes. Also, what you have to do is build this innovative culture, and this is the real hard part. When we set up a company or a business, we like to put rules and regulations in place. But what you want to do is create a culture where people aren't afraid to start questioning things. They're not afraid to bring up new ideas for they might get yelled at by someone above them. And this is what will really drive innovation. It's that open culture. You know, that Singapore Women's Expedition Group for Everest, 5 of them reached the top, which is far more than their goal. And they did that because they could talk to each other and they created this environment. Number 2, vendor collaboration. So the Internet of Things, if you're wondering, it's really simple. It's like a VW bug. We used to talk about it as a potato, now it's about a car. So this car, in the end, this is the solution. But it has all these different parts that come together. The tires, the rim, the drivetrain, the chassis. All these things come together to create that solution, which is the car. And that's no different than we have with IoT. We pull together different components throughout the ecosystem. From the things that capture the data, that data that goes over our different types of networks, through our platforms, to create the applications that we use to actually deliver services or initiate actions. All of it gets stored on the bottom. And then what you have going across all of this, we have to worry about security. We have to worry about the integration. How do we get these different parts coming together to actually work in this solution? And we have to manage to support these users and the solutions. Now what's interesting is there is no vendor out there that sits in all these spaces. So if you're a vendor, what you need to do is start collaborating more and find partners that will strengthen your offering. If you're a customer and you have technology vendors coming in and they say, I've got a widget that sits here, ask them where the rest of these pieces are. Because if not, they're just bringing you a piece of technology. They're not going to bring you a solution. So what should the vendors do? Number 1, define your role in that ecosystem. Where are your gaps? Who should your partners be? Identify the IoT decision makers in the companies. And this is a real tricky one for vendors right now. A lot of the people making IoT decisions sit in the lines of business. And they don't normally buy technology products. So even though you might be a very big ICT vendor, the real decision makers don't buy from you. They buy from the operational technology companies like Bosch or Honeywell or GE. So you got to find out who those people are buying from and partner with them. And when you just start partnering these things, you strengthen your whole go-to-market. It's tough for some of these big vendors to realize you're not going to be fronting the deal. You're going to be in the back end, but that might be where your gateway or server sits. So you have to do this to partner. Final one, the fun stuff, data collaboration. Everyone loves data. We're connecting things from all these different sensors. And what I'm going to show you now is my favorite example about data collaboration I've ever seen. So everyone knows the company Under Armour. It's a sports apparel business. They sell running clothes, other sports clothes, sports equipment. In 2015, they went out and acquired 3 companies, Endomondo, MapMyFitness, and MyFitnessPal. Those people, those companies, had 121 million users who used wearables, trackers or smartwatches. Now, that doesn't sound exciting until you think about why they did it. If I'm Under Armour and I just want to market in Singapore, I have to think, okay, there's a population, I assume this many runners, and they just do blanket advertising to try and reach that user base. With this type of information, they go from having a market of millions to a market of 1, because they actually know that what I'm doing, what sports I'm playing, how I'm performing, and it becomes really interesting because creating that direct customer relationship, it changes the whole business model. Before, they were 5, 6 levels removed from the customer. Now they have a 1-to-1 level for the customer. So fast forward 12 months. A friend of mine is going running in Copenhagen. He's got his wearable on. He uses Endomondo. That shared the information to Under Armour. Under Armour said, you know what? I'm going to pull in the weather information. And then they sent him an email that day that said, today was the coldest day of the year in Copenhagen. Were you prepared? Check out our latest running gear. Now, this isn't a future. You can see, this is the past. This was last winter. They were already able to do this. Now, this is the types of things we can do with data. We don't have to look at it logically. Pull in other tertiary data sources to try and create these solutions. So what I'm trying to say is collaboration drives the IoT ecosystem. You know, we always have our technology components, but we also have to think about as the solutions and people. And these are the components I'm talking about. That internal side, who should we be partnering with? How do we enable our teams to actually participate? The vendors, how do you pull together multiple technologies to create that solution that leverages the data? But enough about what we need to do to make it work. Now we'll talk about some of the more interesting things. So what's next? And I've got my top 2 things about what's coming up for IoT. Number 1, and I hate the acronym, so I apologize, but it's the emergence of the IoT OTT. So the IoT over-the-top providers. Now we saw this in mobile where companies came in and were able to leverage the infrastructure that was in place and the assets that were in place. And we're going to see the same thing now with IoT. Because we have so much information, but what we don't have is intelligence around that information. And I think there's a few companies that are doing it right now that I find very interesting. One of them focuses on the video analytics space. And what I like is we've got cameras everywhere in Singapore, but they're not always the latest cameras. You've got some HD cameras, some will be some older, cheaper, pixelated ones. They can combine all that surveillance information into a single platform. And I like that because it means we're going to take assets that are already there and drive value out of them. Next one are on smart buildings. If you look at something like Capitol Tower in Singapore, you're probably talking about 150,000 sensors in that building. That's a lot of information. What you actually want is someone who can come in, and there's, I think, a company here this week called Demand Logic, who I talked about last year. They do some really cool stuff about aggregating all these different building management systems into a single platform, and you can do that across multiple buildings. So if you think of somewhere like Singapore, where they own the vast majority of the buildings here, there's a lot of opportunity to not go buy new assets, but to get the information off the assets that are already there, and then drive intelligence out of it. And the final one is around manufacturing. There's a really cool AI startup out of Silicon Valley called Falconry. And what they do is work with the operational technology vendors to take the data they're capturing and flip it around to deliver a quick ROI. They're using machine learning and deep learning to improve high-end manufacturing process. All these companies are software-based. It's all as a service. It's one of those things, if you don't get a return in 2 or 3 months, they say, fine, we'll give you your money back. And I love that concept. What they're going to give you is value. We've got a lot of assets. I want value next. Next thing, the year of the low-power WANs. Now, I talked about this a bit last year, and it's all kicked off in the last 12 months, and it's getting quite exciting. This sounds technical, but I'll try and make it as simple as possible on this. A low-power WAN is a dedicated IoT network. Our existing networks they don't have the capacity to handle the number of things that we want to connect. What it also is, it's a very low-cost deployment. So even if you run it on a mobile network or create your own, these things don't cost that much because they only send a little bit of information over very long distances. So you don't need that much base stations to actually set up. The cost savings is important for anybody who's in a smart city space or a customer, an enterprise customer, because the starting points on these are typically 90% less than what you would pay for a traditional M2N connection on LTE or 3G network or 4G network. So that helps really spur the business case. And what you get is market demand. Smart cities, if they're ever going to reach their potential, need these low-power networks because we need hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of applications to actually drive the value. But the challenges around low-power WANs is which path do you follow? Because there's really 3 competing forces in this. The first one is narrowband IoT. The second one is LoRa, and the third is Sigfox. And they're all backed by different groups of companies, but they're all starting to develop a significant presence in the marketplace. And what you need to know about these guys are, number 1, the operators. So if you're on an NB-IoT, this is going to be run by your traditional mobile operators. So you'll see Singtel, StarHub, and M1 launching it here, SKT and KT in Korea, et cetera, et cetera. But when you go to LoRa, this is an unlicensed spectrum, so anybody can become an operator. You've got fixed operators like Telekom Malaysia and Tata Comms doing it. You've got mobile operators doing it like SK Telecom. You've got cities that are deploying their own LoRa networks, and then enterprises where they might have a remote site, they'll deploy it there as well. Now, Sigfox is another different model because they create their own operators in countries. And this becomes challenging them because they're in 32 countries now and they're going to expand to 60. So what's the coverage? NB-IoT will just be like what you have for your normal mobile network. But the key thing is it's only going to deploy in the latter half of this year. LoRa can be by a site, city, or country. Sigfox gives you the opportunity to go global because it will work on any of their networks around the world. But this is the most important part, the backers. On narrowband IoT, it's the chipset manufacturers like Intel and Qualcomm that are backing it, and the software vendors that sell the solution to the operators. When you look at LoRa, yeah, they got hardware and platform guys, but they've also got systems integrators. Now that means that these integrators, like IBM, figure out how they can actually leverage this to start driving the solutions. And then in Sigfox, they're adding even more because they've just done some big partnerships with Bosch to start driving solutions in the manufacturing space. The guys like AWS are in there with them, Microsoft. So they're expanding that ecosystem outside of the chipset and outside of the connectivity. They're getting all those component players together that deliver the solutions. And the latest on this one, Cisco just announced with Jasper they'll support NB-IoT. Tatacom's the big announcement was they're supporting LoRa in India. And then Telefonica broke ranks with the rest of the operators and did a global partnership with Sigfox. So that's your snapshot, but this is the real important part. What do you need to ask of these guys? If it's NB-IoT, are you really going to deploy it this year, or are you going to wait until 5G comes out? If you went to Mobile World Congress, or if you heard the news, there wasn't a lot around NB-IoT. It was all 5G. So I'm curious to see whether or not we're going to see significant deployments. And we might in just the developed countries and not the developing ones. They might wait for 5G. And then can operators actually sell those solutions? Next slide on LoRa. Will SK Telecom's launch succeed? And now that's important because SK Telecom did the best product launch I've ever seen from a mobile operator when they launched LoRa. They came out with 6 different price plans. They came out with 20 different products and services at launch. They own the customers. They've got the services capability. If they can make it successful, I'll stay bullish on LoRa. If not, I'm going to look for different use cases for that type of a model. And what LoRa also needs is that next wave of backers. Is it going to be the operational technology companies that come in and work with them? And on Sigfox, it's can they scale fast enough? Growing from 32 operators worldwide to 60 in 1 year is a big ask of any company. So how are they going to be able to do that? And then also, are they going to be able to drive non-connectivity revenue streams? Because you're creating an operation there to actually finish it up. You need to end out getting really low-cost products in there. You need to do services on the top of that to make your money. So what's the tipping point? It's low-power WANs. And I say this because in the last 12 months, everywhere across the IoT ecosystem, you've seen people get involved, whether it's the operators, the hardware vendors, platform providers, but now the companies like Bosch, Accenture, Amazon, Total, EDF, energy companies getting involved. Everyone's really getting involved in this and driving the market forward. And what's happening is it's not just that supply side. We're bringing together supply and demand. We're bringing the hardware, connectivity, software, services, and that operational technology side to the table. And then what we have is all this pent-up demand in industries like agriculture, what you end up having with your energy companies, leveraging it for smart grids. It's going to be manufacturing and the logistics company that track products throughout the supply chain, and your smart cities. So they've all come together, and this will create that tipping point. A number of small announcements coming together, everyone's competing in that same space. But success won't be easy. The market's fragmented, a lot of vendors with a lot of different messages going out to market. There's still limited use cases. Like I said, we need tens of thousands of use cases, not 1 or 2. Skills, this is always the challenge. Not only the people to develop those use cases, but to go and implement and support them. And finally, this race to zero. The Sigfox operator in Singapore, Unibiz, launched a few weeks back. Their cheapest connection price is $1 per year per connection. So that's very low. So where are they going to make their money? And where will operators make their money going forward? So I've given you a lot of information. I told you about how we need to collaborate more, and there's great things coming, but it's still going to be challenging. So a lot of you are probably saying, now what? Well, for me, it's relatively simple. If you talk about IoT, don't tell me anything about your technology. Tell me what problem you're going to solve. And this doesn't matter whether you're an enterprise, whether you're a smart city, or whether you're a vendor. This is all about solutions, not about technology. So answer that question first. Number 2, who can help me reach my goals? This could be internally. Do you identify those stakeholders? Do you find vendor partnerships to drive the value going forward? It's about pulling them all together. Number 3, what is your plan? If it's just about going to implement technology, you're not doing it the right way. You should follow a strategic methodology. Analyze the market up front, understand the industry trends, competitive positioning, understand the end user insights, and then be able to identify the risks and opportunities. Then position your offering against the competitive marketplace. Where can you be partnering to grow it further? Then think about how you launch it. Does your messaging just talk about your technology? Do you talk to business users who might control the IoT budget? And then find ways to engage, but not just with your customers. Engage your employees so they become your spokespeople. And engage your partners so they can make it easier for them to sell your solutions going forward. And to close off, what I'd like to come back with a quote. There's a way to do it better, find it. Now, IoT, we've actually made some mistakes along the way. We have a lot of progress to make still. What you have now is a couple of days here to learn from a lot of different presentations, a lot of different companies, a lot of different vendors, and to network. So go out there, find somebody who's doing it in a better way, and leverage it yourself. And on that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time.